Welcome to the Employer Content Show, part of the Talent Insights series brought to you by HireWell and CareerWell. I'm your host, James Hornick. Joining me is my co-host from Before You Apply, personal newsletter pioneer, Nick Guggia.
Yeah. Oh, that was good. I did not expect that.
Yeah. All right. What we want to talk about today, there's probably a few aspects to this, and I want to have this one be a little more free form because I think there is a misconception in content. Well, the topic we're talking about is how content achieves multiple outcomes. And I think I should have titled it How It Achieves Multiple Unexpected Outcomes, perhaps. Mm-hmm. I think the unexpected was kind of a key thing I might have missed out of here. There's a lot of examples, both of personal and company-wide, whether you're doing content, no matter what your initial objective is, that I think it's expected and it's normal that you're going to see huge gains of areas you weren't anticipating from the onset. And there's a lot of examples I can give of that with us. There's examples I have of other people I've known who've done that. I know you've got some examples in mind. And I think it's important because I think that is one of the biggest blockers to why companies get into the content game, or why companies don't spend more time on it, or why people don't spend more time on it, is because they think, I think the way we kind of laid this up was we're talking about employer brand, right? So if we're considering doing employer brand for our company, and you look at how much time and effort it's going to put in, and you think, okay, maybe this helps us a little bit out with candidates and whatnot. Aren't there easier ways of getting there than like doing content? You know what I mean? Can't you spend more money on more ads, or spend more money on hire another recruiter or something like that? Wouldn't that be a better spend than? But it's because that calculus is thrown out the window if you just take a broader look at what this content does besides bringing more candidates in the door potentially. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of struggle with. So,
yeah,
I can start if you want to, unless you have something you want to kick off with.
No, go ahead.
You always okay.
I always punt to you because then
because I actually took some notes and you're just going to kind of wing it as we go.
That's pretty much why.
So I'll be real open and kind of honest about us, and kind of what we look for when getting into content. When we decided to get into content originally and look at content marketing, it was because I started recruiting for marketing a few years before that. I worked with lots of companies that worked in, not cutting edge industries. There was a point in time where all of a sudden lots of real estate firms, for example, and other places that you just don't think of as digital progressive shops started using digital, started making money off it. And we decided, hey, we should look into this. And it's at the same time too, like you and I are in sales, who isn't sick of making cold calls, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Or who isn't sick of, you think, okay, inbound, this sounds good. How can we get more people interested in kind of finding us and whatnot? And not to go through the entire journey, but where we kind of landed on what we're doing currently, my initial expectation was, or my initial hope was, that we would get more people reaching out to us because they want to do business with us, which happened. It's definitely successful, but there's so much more than that. And that was like a sliver of what the total benefit was, which is why I downplay it, because it's really not, if you're basing the entire metric off of, companies contacting us because they want to do business, it's good. But, first off, our referral business, which has always been our biggest driver by far, 80% of our business is referral. That took off. That got even higher, especially this last year. It just exploded. And we can talk about attribution and whatnot, but with a lot of people, they're not necessarily coming to us from our website. A lot of times they're going back to the recruiter they worked with previously, or someone they kind of knew. And a lot of them would just mention, oh, by the way, I saw some of the stuff you guys are putting out there. I saw some of your podcasts. I saw some of your videos. It's just more present. And you realize that the amount of people who would probably work with you, I'm saying this about any company, but only don't because you're not top of mind. It's mind boggling. Yeah. I can say far and away, as good as it's been for net new inbound business, it's by far better just as an easy way of reminding people that we're out there. So that exploded. The second thing, which also completely unexpected, our own hiring. Like we talk about employer content all the time and talk about employer brand all the time. I never thought of what we do here as employer brand, but it is.
Yeah.
We've had such an easy time hiring compared to like years past. Like we're in a tough industry to differentiate, right? Everyone who's like, we're always looking to hire experienced recruiters, agency recruiters who have done this work before, people who have been told by every other recruiting firm, hey, we're different, but they're not different, right? It's working for another kind of boiler room operation. Everyone's heard it before. But the hardest thing is just getting people who are good to want to talk to you, right? We've brought on quite a few people in the last several months. We've been growing. We're still looking for more tech recruiters. But in the last year, it's come up in conversation with literally every person we've interviewed.
Yeah.
The content stuff we do. Like they're excited to talk to us because of the stuff that we're doing, which compare that to 2 years ago, we weren't doing anything. It's like night and day, you know? So it has like an enormous impact. Team engagement. It's something interesting for everyone to work on. This podcast show is not the limit of everything that we do here. There's a lot of other kind of smaller initiatives we do, which has given everyone kind of a different side gig and side project to do. That's been huge. Thought leadership. So I saw this take recently. Content creators aren't experts, but they're just advanced learners. Like in order to create content, especially on a regular basis, you have to do a lot of studying. Like the concepts that you and I talk about now versus the stuff you and I probably talked about a year ago, like we're just so far beyond that, only because we have to put the show on every other week, right? And it just really drives like my own knowledge base and awareness of like what's happening in the industry. And I can see that for a lot of other people in the company who are doing these types of things. Like you just become more knowledgeable because you have to.
Yeah.
I'd say in the last thing, I think that also just our individual, like when you're talking to clients, like your market awareness and your ability to, I hate to say sales ability, but your ability to articulate and go deeper on more advanced topics like this sets you apart because of that knowledge you had to build out compared to everyone else who hasn't gone through this exercise.
Yeah.
So if I was going to break that in, I think you can break all that into two groups. So group one is like all the things I mentioned. So more inbound business, like all we were looking for again at the onset of this was, I hope we get more inbound business. Right. But what we end up getting was more inbound business, way more referral business, way easier time hiring than more insights, which are just helpful to articulate to other people, build more credibility when you're actually in those meetings, more team engagement. And it's just like the total net value that we've seen from all this kind of stuff that we've done, this is just us, has been far beyond what we originally anticipated. So like any kind of ROI calculation, it's just the biggest no-brainer we ever had.
Okay. Yeah. So I've experienced the same thing, which I'll talk about. But the thing that I come back to this a lot, where I think like practitioners get this, but those that don't practice this, that aren't actually doing it, like to just rely on numbers, because I think numbers are really safe. It's easy to fall back on numbers and say, okay, give me those metrics, because those are comfortable. I can look at those and I can say, yes, it's working, or no, it's not. But when you're actually doing this, you understand like the nature of how this all works, that there's like multiple touch points, and that influence isn't directly attributed to like one specific thing, that it's a collection over time of just like overall influence. And that stuff gets mentioned, like you were saying, when you're talking to a prospect, or you're talking to a candidate, or somebody sends you a message out of nowhere and says like, hey, like I saw this post or this newsletter of yours, whatever, and they never engaged with it one time. Like it's, and that's the thing, is like, it's like very much a feel thing too. And it's hard to attach numbers to it, which I think like for somebody, especially in-house, who wants to roll something like this out, they are going to be held to some level of metrics, of numbers, when they could like be sitting here going like, I totally understand this. Like intuitively, I get it. I know that this works, but for them to get buy-in to do it is a little bit challenging. And I'm just wondering, like, I don't have an answer for that, because I just felt, go ahead.
I can see. I was actually thinking more about this too, and I think that smaller business. I think it's a business size thing at some point too, right?
Yeah.
Potentially. So businesses with a ton of money, it doesn't matter. Like if you're Google, you can spend whatever you want to an employer brand and justify it because you can, right? But I think that I have visibility into our hiring and our revenue generation and our different channels of that, right? But let's say you're at a mortgage company and you want to spend time on employer brand and you're fighting a fight over whether it's worth it or not from a branding standpoint, but they're only looking at it in terms of employer brand. They're not looking at it in terms of like all the other benefits for it, right? And like in my example, what if the content you do drives more referrals? Other people see the content out there. They think, you know what, we need to come back to these guys. And the problem is that's a business model where your salespeople, if they're getting more referrals, like, no, F that. That's not because of marketing. You know what I mean? You can't, the marketing person's not going to be able to claim, in certain business models, like a success because they're so big and they're so siloed. I think that's a challenge, right? But that's also why I think that small businesses have companies with enough. I shouldn't say small businesses, but companies with enough intelligence, kind of top down to see across the divisions, would have an easy time justifying this versus those that are extremely siloed and territorial, I guess is the bigger thing, would have a really difficult time.
Yeah, or who have like layers of hierarchy and things like that. But I think you're right. I mean, also too is like if this is either led by somebody who's a leader at the company, which you and I both are at our company, so it's like really easy for us to do, or the leadership at the company just believes in it, then there's a whole lot of things you can do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned like Google can just throw money at employer branding content. Sure, they totally can. There's companies like that. I am not confident that what a company throws money at is actually the right thing for them to throw money at.
Sure.
It's easy to go, okay, we're going to create this stuff, and it's really going to be like what they want to create. Yeah. It's what they're going to want to position to the outside world, to show themselves as like a great place to work. But I think like if we're talking about now content that can influence multiple audiences, and if we go, all right, content is distribution of information. And you go, all right, how can we distribute relevant information to an audience that can also influence these other audiences? And I look at like, I've talked about it a lot, but I look at this like internal, external play. And so if I look at like something that Google can throw money at $100,000 high production value video, which we would all look at and go like, damn, that's a really great video, right? But a company without those resources can look internally and write a blog post about, this is how we do this at our company, which might be like super unique and special and whatever. I mean, I know there's companies who've written stuff like that, like before remote work was what it is today, where it was like, this is how we do remote work. This is how we think about whatever kind of like parental leave policy or whatever it might be, just something that you do that is just like killer. And, and like you use that as a way to like communicate internally to your employees. You can use it in onboarding. It's like, there's a lot of use cases, but then at the same time, like there's people in the outside world who really care about that stuff and attach to it. Like I use Patagonia as like an example all the time, because Patagonia did that with some very unique internal policies. They created that stuff for their employees, but they put it to the outside world. And it's one of the reasons why I support that brand so much. And so I really want companies to be more confident and to take bigger risks with documenting the stuff that they do internally that is really different, and sharing it with the outside world, because the outside world, whether it's a candidate or a buyer, like really cares about that stuff.
I think and we were saying this before, I think that for some reason people are terrified of just telling the truth about who they are. I don't know why.
I don't know why.
It's one of the, and like, and I'm saying this even when there's nothing to hide, even when the truth is perfectly fine and truth is a good thing, people are just afraid to say it out loud. Here's what we are, here's what we stand for, here's what we do. I think everyone's just used to being in this overly processed world where everything has to be calculated and put through PR nonsense and whatnot, as opposed to just, here's our policy, here's our take on this. And when those sorts of messages that are just really real, really raw, that hits on both angles in terms of both client brand acquisition as well as employee brand acquisition at the same time. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. And I think that's like another reason why, things like this podcast, you look at like founders who have podcasts and I don't know, things like that. Like we talk so much about like humanizing brands, but then a lot of brands run that through a filter.
Yeah.
But like, we love to hear people like just like riffing or like how they think and like just themselves. And that's why like, especially for smaller companies, I think that going back to what you were saying originally, when you were talking about what you've pulled off at Hirewell, I really think like every company should seriously consider having somebody be like the face of their company, like publicly, like thought leadership, putting themselves out there, because it just like, I use this word influence a lot, but it's just like, there's so much influence that can come from that. Like I never intended it to happen, but it kind of did with me. And it was just an experiment. It was just like, hey, I'm a marketing, sales, whatever team of one, and I still am. And like, whatever, I mean, it's like, it works.
I remember our conversations of you dealing with your early imposter syndrome issues.
It's crazy. I guess I'm still dealing with it. Right.
But yeah, I think that, and this kind of, I want to bring up some examples of stuff too, because we're getting on a few different topics here, but I think we're kind of coming back to it. Like when you talk about individuals doing or companies doing it, or individuals doing it on behalf of their companies, I think it's kind of irrelevant. But I'm a believer that the reason why the calculus on is content worth it, for this purpose is flawed, is because I submit that anybody who continues doing it over an extended period of time and just goes all in on it, right, will have some sort of unexpected positive result.
Yeah.
Some examples. So our buddy like Chris Walker, right? Yeah. We've been totally stealing everything we do based upon like how he started doing his LinkedIn posts. Now, totally. I know that the reason why he started doing content was to gain clients, right? Like but I guarantee he has the easiest time hiring of anybody at a marketing firm his size, bar none. I don't even know if he knows how hard it's supposed to be, because I think he has such an easy time hiring, Yeah. Like I think that but he's not alone. Like Dave Gerhardt, same thing, I don't know what Dave's initial play to get into kind of the content game was. I know that if you just look at his numbers, like his subscriptions on a monthly basis, like he's got his side gig is like most people's salary. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's on top of working a real job. And he probably has, again, an easy as hell time hiring anybody kind of work for his team. Like these all achieve multiple things. I'm sure like these guys went into it hoping for one thing and they end up getting so much more out of it. Like I had a couple other examples. There's one, I won't name this one because it's a friend of a friend, but one of my friend's buddies was a craft brewer, just loved craft brewing on his own, just went all in on it, started writing a blog, right? And the blog got really, really popular. And I think he had like a consulting job, 9 to 5 or something like that. But the blog got so popular, he got a following. He had people reach out to him about starting a brewery, and they needed a brewmaster,
Yeah.
And he ended up going that route. And now his brewery, like they have like distribution along the East Coast. Like it's actually like a legit place, all because of like, I'm just going to write about beer and how I make it and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like it changes the trajectory of like, I guarantee that wasn't an anticipated outcome. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
got a friend a guy I've known for about 10 years now. If you've heard of 2 p.m. So it's a newsletter. But he's a guy, Webb Smith is his name. He's a guy he was early Twitter. He's early Twitter because he has his Twitter name is Webb. So when you ever have your first name, you were in early. But I know he started doing a newsletter about direct to consumer DTC brands years ago. I don't know exactly when he would start doing it, and just like a hobby for him, like a side project. And I'm sure he was doing it to like build contacts, and that's the industry he worked in. So like to gain more knowledge and just to kind of stay on top of things, not to make a newsletter out of it. But that's his job now. Like, I'm not going to throw numbers out, but he's making bank off this, like he's doing extremely well. And it was like, again, not an expected outcome. Like, I know he wasn't thinking, hey, this is going to be my career. He was probably hoping of something that was going to help his career, Yeah. But these things happen all the time. And those are examples of individual people who had kind of the trajectory of what they do change by it. But it's the same thing for companies, and if you go into it expecting one thing and trying to do the cost benefit of is this one outcome worth it, you're turning blinders off to all the other potential outcomes that will come from it. Because I guarantee if you take time and care, put it into any kind of content creation that you're doing, you're going to build relationships with people. You're going to build audiences. You're going to get hit on topics that you just weren't anticipating doing. And as long as you're progressive with it, like it's going to hit on some unknowable, unforeseeable area.
Yeah. Gosh, you're reminding me of some things you said earlier. Like first, why this is top of mind. I think like this doesn't have to be like an all or nothing. I'm sure this isn't the only thing you do at Hirewell. No. Not you personally, but I'm saying like James's content is not the only thing you guys do. There's like other things that you do to whether it's drive business or recruit candidates or whatever. It's just like we've heard this stuff over and over again, but it's easy to look to see somebody who's doing it successfully and forget where they started from and how long it took them to get there. Some like, some move pretty quickly, but like others, it's just, it kind of comes down to like, if you could create good stuff and just outlast everybody, you're going to be towards the top. I mean, there's like a sustainability factor that's very real. And it's easy to get excited about this stuff and like maybe turn out a couple things, but like to keep doing it over and over and over again for a long period of time and sustain the quality, there just isn't a large group of people who can do that. And if you could be one of those people, you're just going to get noticed over time. And I think like that's the same for companies where like we just don't see on the employer branding side, you just don't see scale. There's there's a few things created that like check a couple boxes and then that's kind of it. But there's none of this like repeated over and over and over again creation of things.
Yeah.
And that's like, and that's where like, I'm going to come back to like it being more on the personal side, but somebody who's associated with a company, because on the personal side, you can scale that up.
I think we've talked about why the personal side is better than the corporate side, only because just for the standpoint that people want to hear from real people. You want to hear from the leader of technology, the leader of marketing, then you want to hear about the brand. But I also think, I do think some of it is somewhat self-interest driven, right? Like if you're on year to year looking at what your initiative should be and you're trying to sell it to somebody there internally and whatnot, there might be some disagreement over something. But if you're looking about it as Nate and his career, that's much easier thing to justify because your name and your own, I hate talking about personal brand. You're taking that with you wherever you go next, right? And whatnot. So there's never a shelf life to it in terms of like what, when you leave the company you're at, all of your branding efforts you did for that company are no longer something you're taking with you, which is, but that's why I think that the personal angle on the corporate, bringing it back to kind of employer content, it's the way to go because that's what people want to hear about. And it's also from an audience standpoint, they want to hear from your CTO on technical things and thought leadership, but it's also it's something that those people should realize is also good for them long term and whatever they decide to do with their career next.
Yeah. I think that, man, I think that one person who gains a lot of influence, who's associated with your company, I got to just keep going back to Dave Gerhardt because he's like the best example of an in-house person who has become that well known. But whatever. I mean, it could be anybody. I will take that over employee generated content stuff all day long.
Yeah.
Like there's just so much more you can do with it. Anyway, the other thing that I was thinking about too, which is, I can attribute this to Dave Gerhardt too. I heard him say though, that if you do this stuff, and you become like known in your industry and you're invited on like webinars or podcasts or speaking events and like all this stuff that like gives your company like tons of brand recognition, you're so used to doing it that like you're already ready to talk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you're just used to it. So like, I'm sure like you do this. I totally do this. Like I'll get invited on a podcast and I can just go on the podcast and just talk because I'm basically talking about this stuff all the time anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice and easy. And I know people who don't have that or aren't used to it, they have a harder time with it.
Yeah, well, I think that also ties back to that's a good point, because I think that when I was saying one of the benefits that we've noticed is when we're talking with potential clients, because I didn't want to say it as like sales ability, but I was thinking of it more as domain knowledge, but it's also just fluency with the topics. It's anything's easier when you've talked about it a million times, or when you've thought about it a million times, or when you've laid it out as part of your content plan, you know what I mean? As opposed to kind of like off the cuff. And I think that holds true for, I've noticed the same thing. Like I'm going to be on a couple podcasts in the next month, and I was on a couple so far this year.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, hey, just give me a heads up on like what the 3 topics are you want to talk about. That's all I need, and then you just kind of go. 2 years ago, I couldn't do that. I'd be terrified, you know? I'd have been like panicked. I'd be stumbling all over myself. I wouldn't know what to say. But it's also the same thing when I notice when I'm talking to, and again, I don't want to say this as like a toot my own horn thing, but more of as the reason why you should be comfortable with the stuff and get comfortable is because this also impacts regular conversations, one-to-one conversations you have in the real world. Being able to kind of discuss these topics second nature builds a lot of credibility, versus if you wouldn't have been able to do it. So
yeah, and the ability to answer questions on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
This was brought up to me. I was on this this panel. It wasn't really a webinar. It was more of like a recording that was going to be shared out with their audience. But the host was telling me he was like, it was basically like spontaneous questions with answers, and he said that he had a conversation like that with somebody who's like a influencer.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have the ability to do that. And he's like, I just like was one surprised, and two, like saw it as kind of like a fraud thing in a way. Because like,
what kind of, was she not like, was it different?
Like,
what was she an influencer in? Like, was she like not like someone who would speak regularly or
yeah,
was it,
well, like she's like well known on social media in like post format, but in real life, the ability to like come up with stuff like on the fly just wasn't there.
That's why, I mean, not to rehash other old topics, but that's why I maintain that like video or audio video is so important, because that's how the person is actually them. That's the person saying it. They actually know, whether or not they know what they're talking about, it's another story, but they're able to articulate their point of view, versus you have no, if your entire thing is just posting text in blog format or social format or whatever, like no one knows it's actually you.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Yeah, I know. So.
Yeah, but anyways, I think that tying this all back, I guess as the final kind of unanticipated, unexpected positive outcome is just the ability to be more fluent in your own industry. And that just has a tremendous value. And that's more of a personal thing than a company thing, but it's all interrelated. So,
yeah, I mean, I want to like before we jump, I just, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody internally who is like leading employer brand, let's say. I On the marketing side, I think it's a little bit different. But somebody who might be listening to this or thinking about this stuff and going like, okay, but like what? Like what do I do? I mean, I think like a starting point would be if you think that having somebody like be like a legit influencer at your company or like a thought leader in your industry, if you think that ability is there, just like seek somebody out or a couple people out and just say like, hey, like, I think this is like a real thing that we can do. Let's run it as an experiment. I'm not going to put up any guardrails. Like, do you want to do this? Like, I see you as somebody who's smart, who like looks like it seems like they like have this ability. Is this something you want to do? Cause I'll support you in doing it. And just like give somebody like the opportunity to do that. And I know you'll be able to find somebody at your company who just like wants to kind of run with this and then just go and then like see where it goes. And if you're starting to get some traction, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, whatever, then you just like do more of it and just empower them to do more. But I think it can start with just like one person even. It doesn't have to be this like massive initiative across the company.
Yeah.
And then I really, really want to encourage people to tell more of these like these internal stories. And I don't mean stories about people. I mean like the way you think as a business, the way you operate as a business, why you do things, how you do things. Just like it doesn't have to be sexy. It's just we're talking about a blog post. I want it. I want more of that kind of stuff. It's real information that people care about. We're
starting a new video series based on that, by the way. Not like this. It won't be this format. It'll be like kind of pre-recorded, but just you'll see a series of videos of us having conversations about what we do that's a little different and why we're doing it and what our take is on it. That's exactly
what I'm talking about.
That's it. I mean, just like it's not something I'll put. It doesn't need to be in a podcast. It won't like go on the Talent Insights podcast. It won't be, I don't. It may or may not be on our website, but just like stuff that we'll have kind of posted on social occasionally. Just because I'm gonna be curious to see how it'll play. So, but it's just really kind of addressing. I'll give the spoiler. So one of them we shot it like this past week was like why we don't have a dedicated sales team.
Oh, such a good video. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, yes. Why we're a full desk shop. I believe very firmly in that. I have very strong opinions that shops that have that split desk model, like there's several reasons why the recruiting industry has such a bad name. That's one of them, and I'll explain why in the video. So check out my LinkedIn and you'll see it in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I've done some of those things with Jackson,
Yeah.
Where it's like why we offer a freemium model, like why we think about our industry this way, whatever, and it's just like, yeah, I think it's just important. People care about that stuff and they want to know it.
Yeah. All right,
dude.
Let's wrap it for this week. Everybody out there, thanks for listening to the Employer Content Show. If you want to hear more of what Nate and I have to say, you can subscribe to the Hire Well channel on YouTube, where we have a playlist of all of our episodes, and the Talent Insights podcast, which is available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon, and Spotify. Nate, thanks again.
Thanks, buddy.
Everyone out there, we'll see you soon.